Week 10 of the fantasy football season, and here's quarterback starts or sits every matchup. For this week, the first matchup, Thursday Night Football, the Atlanta Falcons at the Carolina Panthers. So right here, these two teams met a few weeks ago. Marcus Mariota, he definitely had a good ball game in that Week 8 matchup. And right here, I got Mariota as a start. I know last week's game, he only had 8 fantasy points as Marcus Mariota, but after coming off a good game a few weeks ago versus Panther team, I think he could find the running lanes. He's got still decent weapons that he don't always use, though, obviously, in Kyle Pitts and Drake London. But right here, in deeper leagues, I would give Mariota a start. He's been playing good football 2 out of the last 3 games, and I think this week here, he gets back on track to 12-team leagues or deeper. I would give him the nod this week. Now to the Panthers side of things, P.J. Walker, I'm going to sit him in this one. Last week, it was a horrible ball game here for P.J. Walker, where they benched him in the second half of that game after the Bengals were up 4 touchdowns in that one. But right here, P.J. Walker, I know a few weeks ago versus Falcon team in an overtime loss, he went over 300 yards, but it's tough for me to see him do it again this week. So right now, obviously, he's a sit. Now Seattle Seahawks versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Germany. So right now, Geno Smith, he's been playing great football, no doubt about it. This Seahawks team is playing good football because of Geno and what he could do. And right now, this week, though, it's a very tough matchup. This Buck team still can make stops. They still can make plays. We saw it last week, even though it was a weak Ram offense, holding them to 9 points. And right now, Geno Smith, I have as a borderline option this week. But obviously, with a lot of bye weeks and just the struggle as a quarterback, most people probably would start him if they don't have another option. Now to Tom Brady, it hasn't been a great year for Tom Brady, no doubt about it. But I think Tom Brady's going to start turning the corner and getting things going. We saw last week a game-winning drive at the end of regulation there for Brady, even though it was a struggle the first 3 quarters of the game for him and the Bucs. And hey, believe it or not, he's still up there in passing yards in the NFL. So right now, if he could get back on track, once again, it's a good matchup versus a weak Seattle secondary in this game. And I'll still give Brady the nod in this one. The next game, Denver Broncos at the Titans. And I got no interest in anyone in this ball game. I know Russell Wilson, he was a decent pickup off the waiver wire this week here, but he's a guy I sit to drop in my drop videos if you haven't checked that out. But anyway, Russell Wilson, only 2 games over 20 fantasy points this season. This Titan defense, their team that just gets the job done on mistakes of quarterbacks. And last week, I know Mahomes went for about 400 yards in that one, but this Titan defense, he still only held them down to 20 points total. So right here, I don't think Russell Wilson's going to do much in this game. This defense is going to be a problem for him. And Denver's not at home as well, so he's a sit. And now to the Titans things, it don't matter if it's Tannehill or Malik Willis. They're both sits for me. This Bronco defense is good. There's not many weapons on this Titan offense, obviously, besides Derrick Henry, who's obviously one of the best running backs, if not the best running back in fantasy football this season here. And right now, Malik Willis, we saw last week, he didn't do anything, and he's an easy sit. Now to the Cleveland Browns at the Dolphins. Jacoby Brissett, he's been a decent quarterback filling in for Deshaun Watson, who should be back in a few weeks now after serving suspension. But right now, obviously, 10 and 12 team leagues, you're not going to go out there and start Jacoby Brissett in a mediocre matchup versus the Dolphins, even though we saw last week Justin Fields go for a monster fantasy game where he scored over 45 fantasy points. But anyway, Jacoby Brissett, obviously, he's not going to do what Fields did. Fields also ran for 178 yards, but didn't pass much in the air. But Brissett, he's got decent weapons in Amari Cooper, People Jones, and maybe David Njoku comes back in this one. But still, in this game, I think there's better quarterback options, and he's a sit. And Tua, there's not much to say anymore. Tua's looked 100% since that devastating concussion. He's got 2 great receivers in Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. And pretty much each and every week, 25, 30 fantasy points type of week it's been for Tua. And this week here, I think he could pick apart this Brown defense. If New Orleans Saints at the Pittsburgh Steelers, Andy Dalton, he was a crash test dummy in Monday Night Football's game versus the Baltimore Ravens. And he's another guy, at best, he's a borderline option this week. I have him, like I said, with the bye weeks and stuff. You never know, Andy Dalton could come through and have a decent game because this Pittsburgh Steelers defense hasn't been all that great this season, and we've seen some mediocre quarterbacks have good ball games versus them. So right now, if you're in a pinch and desperate for a quarterback, I have Dalton as a borderline option. He's got good weapons, and Kamara who could catch out of the backfield. Chris Olave has been good, and he's even starting to build a rapport with Jawan Johnson at the tight end position, who's had 3 touchdowns now in the last 2 games. And now to the Pittsburgh Steelers side of things, Kenny Pickett, they had a lot of high hopes for him, but so far the rookie struggles have really kicked in here for Kenny Pickett. And now losing Chase Claypool in a deal, to the Chicago Bears. Could definitely be a big part missing of the offense here. Even though the numbers weren't great for Claypool, it was another solid weapon. But either way, this is a decent Saints secondary. And this week here, I can't start Pickett, especially what we've seen from him over the last few weeks. Now to the Lions at the Bears right here. Jared Goff, it's an up and down season for him, and he's more of a home type of fantasy quarterback than on the road. The splits are just way different here with his home and road type of ball games, the numbers here for Goff. So right now, another guy borderline. It's a good matchup on paper versus division rival, the Bears. The Bears we saw last week get torched once again by Tua in that offense. And right here, this Detroit Lion offense, they're probably going to be trailing in this one. If the game script goes the way I think it will. So right here, Goff's got to get St. Brown back going. I know he lost Hawkinson at the deadline, which is a huge player, no doubt about it. But this week here, I think he could put up borderline numbers, 15 to 20 fantasy points if you're in a pinch. Now, Justin Fields, the last 3 weeks here, he's been on a tear. And last week, a monster fantasy game, like I mentioned for Fields early in the video, 178 rush yards on the ground and 3 total touchdowns. So Justin Fields, they're finally building the offense around him. He's looked more comfortable. And this Bear team's been competitive, and they've won a couple games and been in games over the last month. So right here, Justin Fields, he's a must-start, I think, at this point in the fantasy season. Because think about it, on the ground, he's getting at least 10 fantasy points per week. And if you just could get 7-8 fantasy points in the air here, that's already 18 fantasy points off the bat. Now to the Minnesota Vikings at the Buffalo Bills. So Kirk Cousins in this one, I'm going to have to sit him. This Bill defense is great, no doubt about it. Kirk Cousins, another guy like Jared Goff, where he's a great player at home, but on the road, he's a mediocre quarterback. And this week here, with a road matchup at a tough defense in the Bills, probably one of the best defenses, if not the best, in all pro football here. I would sit Kirk Cousins in this one. I could see this be a grinded out type of ball game where we see a lot of Dalvin Cook and Kirk Cousins make a lot of safe throws in this one. So right now, I have him as a sit this week. Josh Allen, we know he's banged up in that Jet ball game with the elbow injury. And obviously, if he plays, he's matchup proof and still the best fantasy quarterback, in my opinion. And he's a start this week. Texans at the New York Giants here. Davis Mills, we haven't seen much out of him this season. He's got a limited amount of weapons. Brandon Cook, supposedly, he's back with the team and is going to play in this ball game. But even if he does, he really hasn't done anything this year, Brandon Cooks, to be a guy that could put up fantasy points and carry Davis Mills to a good fantasy game. Nico Collins, possibly he could return in this one as well. But either way, I don't like him because his Giant defense has been pretty solid this season. Daniel Jones, on the other hand, I would give him the start this week here. Daniel Jones at home, he's been a solid player for most part of the season here. He's a guy that could run the football as well. I know the Giants don't have good receivers, Slayton and Wendell Robinson as their top 2 guys right now at the receiver position. But like I said, with the running yards and not a great Texans defense, I think Daniel Jones could map out anywhere from 18 to 23 fantasy points in this one. And I got him as a start. Jacksonville Jaguars at the Chiefs. At Trevor Lawrence, it's been an up and down season in terms of fantasy football as well. Some good games and some games where he don't show up. And this week here, I think this Chief defense is going to put pressure on him. And it's been an inconsistent receiving core. Christian Kirk's had some bad games as well this year. Zay Jones and Marvin Jones, only a few pop games here and there, obviously, for this Jacksonville Jaguar team. And Evan Ingram as well. So right now, I just can't trust Trevor Lawrence. The only guy I really could trust on Jacksonville week in and week out to play is Kirk and Travis Etienne. And now to Patrick Mahomes, what could you say? Mahomes and his new cast of receivers this season, they're really finding their stride. Juju Smith-Schuster the last 3 weeks has been great and playing like a true number one. McCole Hardman's finally had that breakout season after it took him a few weeks to get going this year, but 4 games in a row with double-digit fantasy points. And who knows, Kadarius Toney could get things going as well soon. And obviously you got Kelsey, so Patrick Mahomes on top of his game once again this season, and he's a must-start quarterback each and every week. Indianapolis Colts at the Vegas Raiders. So right here, Sam Elder, last week he was horrible versus a great New England Patriot defense. And this week here, I know this Raider defense really isn't that good, but I like them as a start this week in fantasy football. But anyway, Elder, he's an easy sit for me. We haven't seen anything from him in the first 2 ball games. Versus Washington in week 8, he didn't do anything. And then week 9, nothing at all in that one. So he's a sit. And Derek Carr, he had a nice bounce-back game versus the Jacksonville Jaguars in Jacksonville, but they still lost the game was the Raiders. He had 23 fantasy points, is Derek Carr. And this week here, he's a borderline option because I think this Colt defense can make a few plays. They're a solid defensive unit, And for the most part, this Colt team, they're in most football games. They just can't close the deal because of their offense, not moving the football and getting it done. I know last week was a blowout, but besides that, every game's pretty much been close. Now to the Arizona Cardinals at the Los Angeles Rams. So right now, Kyler Murray, you start him each and every week. Quarterback's been a weak position this season, no doubt about it. And Matthew Stafford, in this one, how could you really trust Stafford? He really hasn't done anything over the last 5 weeks of the season. 13, 14 fantasy points. He's really topping off that. And with a guy like Cooper Kupp, you think he'd get a little bit more, but it's pretty much been Cooper Kupp or nothing. Tyler Higbee, the last 2-3 weeks here, he's disappeared in this offense, has done nothing. I know he's not 100% with the leg injury. I know it's a division matchup, anything can happen. But right now, Matthew Stafford, it's been a struggle for him. And I have him as a sit this week. Now, Dallas Cowboys at the Packers. Dak Prescott so far in the 2 games back. 1 great game and 1 mediocre to poor game for Dak. But right now, this Cowboy team, the success for them is going to be running the football first, I think, and working off of play action and obviously different type of play calls. With Dak Prescott this week, he's a top 10 quarterback, in my opinion. This Packer defense, it's not a bad defense, no doubt. But I think this Cowboy team, they want to go in there, especially Mike McCarthy versus former team, and get a W in this one. And Dak Prescott, he's got CeeDee Lamb, you got Michael Gallup, even though he's been struggling. Him and Dalton Schultz still have a great rapport over there, no doubt about it. And this week here, I like Dak Prescott to have a good ball game in this one. And I got him as a start. Aaron Rodgers, he's a guy you can't trust anymore. He's got a lack of weapons at wide receiver, no doubt. Devontae Adams has been a big loss off season going to the Raiders. And Rodgers, the most he's done this season is 20 fantasy points, has been his peak. So right now, in a tough matchup versus a great Dallas Cowboy defense where Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence is going to try to get back there in the backfield to Aaron Rodgers. It's going to be a tough one, no doubt. And I just can't trust him. Even guys like Taylor Heineke, Jimmy Garoppolo are quarterbacks I would start over an Aaron Rodgers this week here. Or even maybe a Jared Goff, because that's how down he's fell with Aaron Rodgers. And also with Romeo Doubs now out 4 to 6 weeks most likely. There's no way you could trust him. Yes, he could shock people and have a good game. But versus this Cowboy defense, especially coming off a bye week as well, he's a sit for me. Now to Sunday Night Football. The Los Angeles Chargers at the San Francisco 49ers. Justin Herbert, no matter the matchup, he's a top 5 quarterback pretty much each and every week, and he's a start. Keenan Allen possibly could come back in this ball game, but I'm not holding my breath. But still, even with the limited amount of weapons, Herbert's still putting up decent numbers, and coming into the year, he's a top 5 quarterback, but obviously those numbers haven't been like that. But he's always a top 12 guy at worst case. Now to San Francisco, Jimmy Garoppolo, he's been a hot pickup over the last few weeks here. And now to have a new guy like Christian McCaffrey that's going to get him fantasy points off the rift right away, just on dump-offs alone and yards after catch. Jimmy G now, he's moving into that top 12 conversation for remainder of the season possibly. When you got a Deebo Samuel, a Brandon Ayuk, and a Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle, that's a stacked offense with a lot of speed and a lot of playmakers. And this week here versus a mediocre to poor defense in the Los Angeles Chargers, without some of their great players, J.C. Jackson out for the season and Nick Bosa still out. He's definitely a start on Sunday Night Football. And now to the Commanders at the Philadelphia Eagles. Taylor Heineke, he's given this Commander team some life over the last few weeks since he's come in as the starter for Carson Wentz. And this week it's a tough matchup versus the 8-0 Eagles. This Eagle defensive line is vicious, no doubt about it. And then adding Robert Quinn at the trade deadline on top of it makes it even more tough. But like I said, Heineke's been playing good football. He could run with the football as well. And he's had at least 2 touchdowns in every start so far, going back to week 7 here is Taylor Heineke. And he's got good weapons like McLaurin, Curtis Samuel, and Antonio Gibson out of the backfield. So he's got something to work with. But in this matchup, I just don't like him. So I got him as a sit. And Jalen Hurts, not much to say in this one. Having an MVP type of season. You got good weapons in A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, Devonta Smith, Miles Sanders, and this Commander defense really don't stop anyone. So right now, Hurts is obviously a must start this week. So that's start sits quarterbacks every matchup, week 10 of the fantasy football season.